Welcome to Forbes Newsroom. Joining me now is Janet Novack, Forbes Washington Bureau Chief and Assistant Managing Editor. Janet, thank you so much for joining me.
Pleasure.
So, as we know, the House Ways and Means Committee released a report on former President Donald Trump's tax returns. To you, what stood out?
Well, if you've been following the Trump story and all that's been written, the numbers, shocking as they are, didn't really stand out because we knew from reporting in the New York Times and elsewhere that Trump paid very little taxes and in most years didn't pay any because he had all these losses he carried forward. So the fact that he paid 750 in 2016 and 2017 didn't really shock me. He paid almost $1 million in 2018, nothing in 2020, a little bit in 2019. What surprised me was the dysfunction within the IRS and how lax its approach was to its own internally stated policy of auditing all presidents and vice presidents. So going all the way back to Nixon, there are two traditions we have in this country. One is that all the presidential candidates and presidents up until Trump disclosed at least some tax information. Some just put it all out there.
Why do they do that? Why?
Because during Watergate and during Nixon's problems, it became clear that there might be some problems with his taxes. And he said, I'm not a crook, and I want the Joint Tax Committee to look at my taxes. And he ended up paying, about $400,000. But the point is that nobody wanted to be like Nixon. So everybody was disclosing their taxes. In fact, Jeb Bush, who was defeated by Donald Trump in the 2016 primaries, he put 35 years of tax returns out there for the public to see. So that's one tradition that Trump was, ignoring. The other tradition, which was memorialized in the 1970s in the IRS manual, which is like their Bible, was that they were to audit every president and vice president. But we had no real evidence on what they were doing. We assumed they were doing these audits. So what shocked me the most in this report was the long delay in the audit of Trump. Depending on which documents you believe, they may not even have started auditing him until the Democratic-controlled House Ways and Means Committee in 2019 asked for his returns and for evidence and documents relating to the audits. That's number one. But number two was the sort of low level at which they pursued this audit. They had one auditor on it for a while. And when they wanted to go up to 3, Trump's lawyers complained that, well, you're tripling the manpower and that's not fair. And at various times, they didn't do things like even ask for substantiation on these huge deductions. And that just struck me as very odd. But the explanation the auditor put in the file was, well, he had real tax accountants and lawyers preparing his returns. So, we don't need to check that. Well, there are two problems with that. Number one, if you as an ordinary taxpayer get sent what's called a correspondence audit from the IRS and they say, we think you fudged your charitable deductions or please substantiate them, you have to send the documents back. They want to see them. The second part is that anyone who has been following taxes in this country for as many decades as I have knows that some of the most questionable, to the line and over the line tax strategies over the past 30 years have been promoted by otherwise or previously considered reputable accountants and lawyers. So the notion that he's got big name accountants or lawyers and therefore we don't really need to see this is just shocking. Now, the IRS had huge problems with resources in this period. So during this period, for example, the percentage of people who earn over 10 million getting audited fell from 20% to something around 4%. So there's no doubt they had resource constraints. But this is something that in their manual they said they were going to do, audit the president. And his returns required more than just one guy sitting there saying, well, I trust the accountants. So if you ask me what shocks me, it's not that Trump paid very little taxes and that he had all these losses. It's that the IRS, which we all knew was dysfunctional and in a funk, was this poorly resourced and had this little gumption. And I cannot honestly tell you whether we're looking at interference politically or incompetence. I always tend to go with the simplest explanation of incompetence. But so that's what shocks me.